Hello, I am a guest lecturer for this week of your disability course. I'm very excited as this is disability, neurodiversity, mental health, accessibility, accommodations, all of that within libraries and within our field. Those are all my research little tidbits. My name is Dr. Abigail Phillips. I'm an assistant professor here in SOAS, and my ideally short talk is called Masking, Passing, and Unmasking in the Library: Disability, Accommodations, Patrons, and Library Workers. Bit of a mix of a couple of studies I've done and just information that I feel that is beneficial and helpful. I'm working to do this more and more within my paper presentation, within the papers that I write and my presentations, and just making it clear that not only was I a library kid, then became a public librarian and did the PhD program, and now am an LIS educator and scholar, but the research that I do comes from a very compassionate and very much personal place. I like to acknowledge that I'm neurodivergent and disabled, so what I bring to my research are my personal and professional experiences as a neurodivergent, disabled student, librarian, instructor, and researcher to any work that I do. So often research within disability, particularly within autism and mental health. The people conducting the research are not part of the disability community, or not. They're neurotypical or able-bodied, and that I like the idea that research is super collaborative and participatory. But they often leave out the voices of those who are disabled, who have these lived experiences, and those are key voices to have within your research if you really want to make an impact. So I like to acknowledge that I am part of the disability community, and it impacts my research, and it adds to it significantly. Disability overview. You all probably have covered this, I would imagine, by this week, but daydream while I discuss a few things. There's approximately, it's really hard to gauge disability stats, especially globally or anywhere, but approximately 15% is what the World Health Organization has developed or has come up with. There's some sort of disability, physical and visible disabilities, as they call it, neurodiversity, or visible disabilities. So those are two words that are used two terms that are used quite often. I also wanted to highlight there are two more models of disability, but these are the most well-known and make the most sense to share with you all. The medical model: disability is perceived as an impairment in a body system or function that is inherently pathological. From this perspective, the goal is to return the system or function to as close to normal as possible. And the word normal is doing a lot of work there, as is pathological. So from the medical model, the understanding of disability is that there is something that needs to be fixed about you, or needs to be treated or assessed so we can bring you as close to the societal notion of normal, whatever that is. I don't think any of us are normal, for whatever that word actually means, but there's something wrong with you. We got to fix it, and so you can continue on living a productive, normal life. The social model, which is one I work with, is that individual limitations are not the cause of disability. Rather, it is society's failure to provide appropriate services and adequately ensure that the needs of disabled people are taken into account in societal organization. So it's not that there's something broken or flawed or needs to be fixed about me. It's that the world around me, society's constructed it in such a way that it's not as accessible as it should be. It's not as beneficial or able for me to engage with, just like any other, whether disabled or not. So it's more of a critique of society. And use of language, I always find this really fascinating. There's person-first language, so an individual with autism, or identity first, an autistic individual or autistic person or child, autistic person. Honestly, the disability community, from everything I've gathered, it's kind of goes in ebbs and flows, but certain people prefer person-first language or identity-first language. Some, like myself, it doesn't really matter. It's always good to be respectful of people and listen to how they talk about themselves, or ask them how they would like to be described, if that's a relationship that you feel comfortable doing so. But it's good to think that there are two ways of labeling or identifying yourself within the disability world. Neurodiversity overview. The term emerged in the late 90s, so not terribly old, which is why there's so many definitions and so many voices that maybe oppose each other, or there's just still a lot within this field. I am from the South, so if my accent comes out, here we are. So the term emerged in the late 90s from Judy Singer, an autistic sociologist, and she really wanted something that felt comfortable for her to describe herself. And it grew out of and was embraced by the autism community, first off, and then adopted not long after by the ADHD community and by advocates for those with ADHD and those with autism. So there's still so much work to be done and a lot of discussion to be had about what some of these words like neurodivergent, neurodiverse, neurodiversity, neurotypical, what these even, when they should be used, how they should be used, what exactly do they mean? And I'm just making a note about self-diagnosis and versus official diagnosis, so diagnosis by a physician, a medical professional. Self-diagnosis, when COVID hit and during lockdown and even still ongoing, there's been a lot of self-diagnosis of autism, ADHD, and mental health issues, mental health disorders. The medical community can sometimes be critical of self-diagnosis. They want you to be formally diagnosed. But from my view, it has to happen first with yourself, where you sense that there's something that is different about yourself that could be helped by maybe medication or some therapy or some sort of treatment, not to necessarily make you quote unquote normal, but you notice things about yourself, even beyond neurodiversity, but you know when there's something that needs to be worked on. And that leads ideally to an official diagnosis. If, again, maybe if you have insurance, the funds, the financial support ability, if you live in a community that has strong medical professionals with like psychiatrists, mental health providers, therapists. I grew up in a very small town in South Georgia, and it's very hard in rural communities to find the care you need, especially with neurodiversity. It really is. It's gotten better with telehealth, but it's a work in progress. So again, as this term neurodiversity has become more of a term now, but really it's still early on. There are many definitions. I thought these three were pretty good explaining this kind of complex concept. Wikipedia, a framework for understanding human brain functions and mental illness. It argues that diversity in human cognition is normal. See, there's no normal. We're all different. And that some conditions classified as mental disorders are differences and disabilities that are not necessarily pathological. So that runs into the medical model as there's something that needs to be corrected here. This is Emmylou again. She's enjoying this. Oxford Dictionary, differing in mental or neurological functions from what is considered typical or normal. Again, I like this idea of differences amongst all of us. Some need more help than others. It's just a matter of our brains are different, and they perform differently, and they function differently, and there's just differences. And Child Mind Institute, which I just like this shortness of this, differences in the way people's brains work. This is essentially it when you're talking about neurodiversity. The term still is unfamiliar to some, and sometimes I've gotten some comments about whenever I use neurodiversity, but it's really just that our brains are different, and let's try to make society a more accessible place and more conducive to being ourselves. Okay, this goes back. I did a study, IMLS funded study, thankfully, focusing on making. I do work in maker spaces as well, in public and school libraries. But we looked into how to make maker spaces more accessible for patrons with disabilities, from kids to elderly. So we just did focus groups, and we did interviews, and we learned a lot, not only about maker spaces, but libraries in general, what they can do to better meet patron needs. Patrons do not always know whom to turn to when asking for accommodations or asking for help, assistance, and sometimes it just feels really awkward. At least that was for me. So I just figured things out in the best way possible growing up, and even in undergrad and master's and PhD. But we need to make these environments comfortable and clear where patrons should go and ask for what they need to help them, you work with the library, work inside the library. A lot of these are very basic. So many of the things that patrons talked about, or our interviewees talked about, are seemingly basic, not that complex. Furniture must be accessible. Like stools do not accommodate all bodies, if you think about it. Or with people with back problems, or the furniture is sometimes a large problem. Maneuvering around it, moving it, and not being able to move it. Again, these are pretty small, but I still think they're worth pointing out. Counter heights don't allow access by all. If you are in a wheelchair or are not able to reach the counter in a functional way for you, there's been more movement towards like counters that electronically move up and down so people can figure out where they want to work. Tables too close together in the library. Physically out of reach materials and resources like books that are on high shelves that people who are elderly or have difficulty getting on a step stool to reach up, or in a wheelchair, or some other physical disability, just books, tools, cords, door frames, everything you just really have to assess. And library spaces must be accessible. Again, going back to like doors and going up to the circulation desk. What is the height? And what is the height if there's a reference desk? How do people engage with or go up to a computer to use? Is there barriers to access for them? So it's overhead power cords that are either too low or a danger to blind patrons, or too high for short individuals, kids, wheelchair users. There's so many small little things, but they do add up when you're thinking accessibility. So creating more inclusive spaces for all. How can you implement this in your library? Create a positive environment to gather disabled, mixed abled, and fully able people to make something together. This is alluding or talking about maker spaces, and that you don't, ideally, libraries sometimes do this with sensory story times for kids or with autism or some other cognitive disability. But we don't always want to isolate. We don't want to isolate people with disabilities to, this is where everything's works for you, or maybe everything works for you. We want libraries to be an engaging, positive, welcoming experience where people can interact with one another regardless of, just interact as people. Be thoughtful about where our materials, specific spaces like maker spaces, or even meeting rooms, again, tables, chairs, movable furniture, and points of access are situated in the library. So where are patrons able to go to ask a librarian or a library worker for help, getting something or working with something, or just enjoying the library experience. So provide options. Sometimes these they're usually pretty cost effective, but there are times when they are not. Be flexible. I think flexibility is really key in inclusive, accessible spaces. Hard and fast rules are not always necessary and provide a number of limitations for individuals who neurodivergent, neurotypical, or not. And I just love this quote from one of our participants in the Makerspace accessibility study. Access is, in my understanding, a welcoming way of joining a group, a space, not a ticket to a dominant culture. So this isn't, in this individual's mind, it's not to become part of the normal culture, the whatever society views as normal, but it's a way of taking up space or joining a group or having that positive, welcoming experience. In libraries or other information organizations, we want people to be comfortable and feel welcomed and included in our libraries. And these last two slides are from the Accommodations study that another colleague and I did, focusing on librarians and library workers seeking accommodations beginning after the beginning of the pandemic. And this is in academic libraries, which there's so much I learned from this that was jarring and hard to manage. I, as somebody living with a disability who has worked in libraries, I can certainly see where this could happen. The accommodations seeking process is repeatedly described as dehumanizing. That word came up a lot. They just felt their colleagues may be against them or critiquing them or judging them, or are they really disabled? You have to be. How do you prove you're disabled? Or to hire admin. It was the process is very long, and with the people we discussed with and then it had to be your accommodation had to be renewed either every 6 months or every year. So you had to go through that whole process of talking about your disability and explaining why you need it. And invasive, it also is a word that came up quite a few times. Library workers do not feel safe asking for accommodations during the hiring process. So I've also been told this as well, or encouraged not to, like on an interview, like a application, to not identify as a disabled, because there may be some sort of backlash that that is hidden from you. But our workers, our library interviewees did not discuss in the hiring process for their current position or their position at the time. And there's essentially no institutional process support for academic library workers. Despite having, at UWM, we have our Accessibility Resource Center that is for students, still also not ideal to go in and needing to prove, and then having maybe instructors or other students assume you're just trying to get by or make it easier, or get the easy way out. I've heard these from direct interviews, but it's all over the place with academia or working in an academic library. I haven't done enough research into school and public libraries to know exactly, but even there, Most of the time you go to HR. HR, in many of the cases, were untrained, did not know what to do, made the process either hostile or made the process even more time consuming, or just flat out denied your accommodation request. So it's odd to me that with employees for an academic library, for faculty, staff, library employees, any of them, it's very hard and very confusing who to turn to. But there is something for students, which that is always is intriguing to me. And is it even worth disclosing professionally and personally? Should you just stay masked? So unmasking means just to make sure we're on the same page, means you clearly state that you have a disability and you need an accommodation for it, or even maybe you just have a disability, so you would like to be respected and have some sort of your accommodations met, assistance in certain ways, or not even assistance or in that like help, but just making the workplace more conducive to you. And masking is what a lot of people with disabilities, and neurodiverse in particular, continue to do. We had a participant that bluntly stated, when we asked, what would you say to someone in libraries in academic libraries seeking an accommodation? And that this person said, it's not worth it. Just keep masking. Just keep pretending you're typical, you're normal, because the repercussions seeking accommodation just did not. It was just so much, so dehumanizing, invasive, changed relationships, dynamics within the workplace, which is kind of crushing to hear. Many recommended staying masked, not revealing a disability, passing generally invisible disabilities, because those are still still disabilities that people who are neurotypical don't understand or don't view as a disability. They just, with a physical disability, it's a little different. But so librarians are encouraged to, unless you're tenured or even beyond, just staying silent. So wait until you get tenure, then you can do this, you can say this, or you can express a need. But honestly, just keep your mouth shut, because there's no real support. Admin, HR, EEOC, not there to support employees, not there to support library workers, librarians. They're there to support the institution, so the university. So advocating for yourself is so incredibly important. It's very hard, but nobody else, or I shouldn't say nobody, will advocate for you. You will have peers, friends, colleagues, supervisors that will advocate for you, but advocating for yourself is critical, because sometimes that's the only way forward to get what you need to have an accessible workplace. And vocational awe is very real and expressed through the words of many of our participants. I always make my foundations students read the vocational awe, where the article where this concept came from. But vocational awe within librarianship is essentially, or any library work, it's almost like it's a calling. I was I'm a librarian because I want to help others, do good in the world, um, make reading and literacy more important, or given to as broad of the community as possible, which is that's nothing wrong with that. But when you put your job before yourself and say that I have to do this, I have to take this on, despite the fact that it's affecting me physically, mentally, psychologically, um, it's almost a religious with the calling aspect. Like, I have to do this no matter what cost to myself, which leads to um, mental health issues and physical issues with and eventually burnout, which I experienced hardcore. You just can't do it anymore. It's so many of the helping service professions like nursing, social work, therapists, and I'm trying to think, there was one more, but the vocational all kind of isn't just our field. It's within these professions that are generally pink-collared and not as respected as much as they should be. So the pay is low, but you're like, I want to do this. I want to be there to help, which is wonderful, but do take care of yourself. Just a couple of additional resources. I was supposed to hit. Okay, we're going to work with this time. There's 2 books I love. Against Techno-Ableism, Rethinking Who Needs Improvement. Ashley Shue is a professor at, I believe, Vanderbilt, and has she's amputee, so she talks a lot about the integration of technology into disability and how, like in other research, the disability community is not approached about, hey, we designed this new hand or designed this new wheelchair, or without talking to the people who are actually going to use it, because you're just setting yourself up for disaster there. But fantastic book, short, which I appreciate. Year of the Tiger, An Activist's Life by Alice Wong. She's an amazing disability advocate. She regularly writes for Teen Vogue, does what is it, her, like I can't remember the exact name of her column, but it's a Disabled Voices. So she just talks about different aspects of disability. But this is a part memoir, part exploration of the work that she's done. It's amazing. There's 2 new resources that I've come across. LibAlly, it's a guide for making library content accessible, so it's good to check out. Disability Visibility Project was created by Alice Wong, and essentially it's to make disability not to be visible, that you know there are people in your community, there are people who live next door or live in your home who are disabled, and instead of it being so hidden and secretive. This TED Talk by Temple Grandin, The World Needs All Kinds of Minds, is really great. I know TED Talks can be a little questionable, but she is a researcher with autism and works with animals, and just nice discussion by her, or talk by her. And the last one is a very new rule on the accessibility of web content and mobile apps provided by state and local governments. And this is from the Americans with Disability Act.org. So it's a government resource. So yeah, I just was made aware of this earlier this week, so I added it. So those are just a slice of resources. You can always stop by my office or email me if you like more resources. I'm facing a shelf of books, and there's a shelf of books over there that is all about various disabilities. And plus I just love talking about this, especially with beyond patron services, but also talking about supporting librarians and library workers, because the research is limited on them. Anyway, questions, thoughts, critiques. You just want to share something, share a resource, please reach out. You have my work email. You can also look me up on SOS, the website, just to see what my current research is and what's going on. And if you're still on Twitter or Blue Sky, that is an access point for me. And I have a website because my CV and biographical information have to live somewhere. And I was told early on in the PhD program, make yourself a website. I feel for librarians or MLIS students, that's probably good advice as well, even if it's just the bare bones kind of information about yourself. Okay, thank you so much for listening and enduring my cat. Or not enduring, but enjoying her brief appearances. And I know this is a little bit longer than it's supposed to be, but thank you.